March 4th, 1861. Abraham Lincoln is sworn in as the 16th President of the United States. Upon entering office, he looks upon a nation divided. 7 southern states have already seceded from the Union. A little over a month later, Fort Sumter was attacked by Confederate forces, thus beginning the Civil War. 139 years later, another historic event happened in the world of video games. On March 4th, 2000, the Sony PlayStation 2 was released in Japan. On launch day, the PS2 sold just under 1 million units, the most successful console launch up to that point. This was just the beginning for Sony, however, as the PS2 went on to become, and still is, the best-selling video game system of all time. So why am I talking about this? Pretty strange coincidence, don't you think? Well, the Civil War is a topic seldom brought up in the world of video games. Other wars, such as World War II and the Cold War, tend to get all the spotlight. The Call of Duty franchise comes out every year, selling millions and millions of copies, and is perceived generally well by the audience. But Civil War games will come out once in a while, and they receive little to no fanfare. But they're actually really interesting depending on who made the game and how they perceive the war. So today, we're going to look at 3 different Civil War games from the early 80s to modern day, and we'll see how historically accurate they are, going one by one. The late 70s and early 80s were home to some of the most influential games we still fondly remember today. Pong, Pac-Man, Frogger, just to name a few. Yet at the same time, there were very few regulations as to who could make a game for any video game system. Even Purina, yes, the pet food company, was making video games. Our first game is simply entitled Civil War. It was released in 1981 on early home computers. It was a basic time for games like this. No, really, this game was actually programmed using the basic programming language. It's a text-based game. All you do is read the text, enter an option on the keyboard, and, well, off you go. I wouldn't be surprised if this game was written by just one dude. The game is so simple, the entire code is just above 1,400 words. Hey, that's less than my Civil War film analysis paper. Back in the day, a lot of programs like this were printed in magazines for the computer hobbyist to type in line by line. One mistake could render the program useless. In our case, Civil War was distributed through the mail by a company named International PC Owners, operating out of Pittsburgh. Now you'd think that this game, being programmed by one guy, would actually be a pretty simple and entertaining game, perhaps even educational. But believe it or not, you actually play as the Confederacy, trying to claim victory from the North, going through every major battle of the war. As soon as you hop in, the game warns you that our choices could change the course of history, and that it all depends on you. After that, you make your way through all the major battles of the war. It tells you the name of said battle, along with an excerpt of what actually happened, as if to influence your decision. Each one presents you with your available funds, and the number of men on each side. It asks you to divide these funds into 3 categories: food, salary, and ammunition. Depending on how you allocate it, you can change the course of the war. After you decided on how you use your money, the game will either put you on the offensive or the defensive. Now, at the beginning of the game, you're given the options of what you can actually do once this happens. For example, pressing 1 on the offensive gives you an artillery attack. You're definitely going to need a notebook to remember all this stuff. But because I'm nice, I'm going to put it right here. Now, it's actually kind of annoying to calculate how many funds you're going to need for each thing. I happen to just use a calculator. But honestly, typing in number upon number gets pretty mind-numbing after a while. After you get it, it's actually a pretty simple, fun, and, I don't know, maybe even educational type of game. But if you're put into this and you have no idea what keys you're supposed to press or what does what, oh man. After you type in your options, you either win or lose the battle depending on how you used your funds and what you exactly did on the battlefield. The game will list the casualties and desertions of each side, as well as how real Confederate casualties compare to yours. It's actually kind of cool. Depending on how well you do, the Union could surrender at essentially any time. My 20-minute playthrough ended after the Confederacy pulled through and managed to win Gettysburg, of all things. It tells you how many battles you won and lost, and then just bluntly ends. No congratulations, nothing. I'm actually not sure what to think about this. Civil War is just about as basic as it gets, and it's not really enticing for any gamer or any audience today. But it's pretty interesting. Even though you play as the Confederacy, there's not really any biases towards either side. When the North wins, it doesn't make you feel like you're an underdog or that there's a lost cause or anything like that. It's actually pretty entertaining. It tells you the downsides of each side when you're about to look at the war stuff, and it's pretty darn accurate, but honestly, it's a little boring. Anywho, let's move on. Our next game moves us 9 years into the future, to 1990. By this time, video games were cemented in the world of entertainment, and the notion of them being a phase or a fad died out. This was almost single-handedly brought on by Nintendo in 1985, revitalizing the US gaming industry after a massive crash in 1983 with the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES for short. This game, unlike Civil War, actually has graphics, music, and sound effects. Already we have a lot more to work with. This game is called North and South, where you get to play as North and South. Believe it or not, North and South was actually a pretty popular game when it came out. So popular, it came out on 8 platforms, basically every home computer that ever existed at the time. The version we'll be looking at today is the Nintendo Entertainment System version of the game. I'm getting pretty tired of using a keyboard, and having a controller would be pretty helpful. It was developed by a French company called Infogrames, and published on the NES by a Japanese company called Kemco. Now I know what you're all thinking. Why the heck is a French company making a game based on the Civil War? Well, it's actually pretty interesting, you see. Infogrames at the time bought the rights to make games based on French and Belgian comics of the day, one such being Les Tuniques Bleues, translated to The Bluecoats, featuring comedic satirization of the Civil War. That being said, North and South is far from serious, apparent from the moment you stick the game in the system. Now, before we dive deep into what actually lays ahead, it might be helpful to look in the instruction booklet. It might give us some helpful information to explain the madness that's about to ensue. We actually get some clarity as to the game we're about to play, with a 2-page summary explaining the background of the US before the war. But it's honestly kind of worrying. First of all, Abraham Lincoln never ran on a platform to abolish slavery in 1860. He ran only to stop the spread of slavery and to preserve the Union. This blurb is strangely pro-Southern. It says they fought viciously in spite of overwhelming odds, and that Grant run by numbers alone, which is simply not true. Then it says we have a chance to change the history books as if we want the Confederates to win for some reason. As a game that presents itself as a comedy and wants you to have fun, I find it odd that the manual really leans in favor of the South. As we refer to this manual again, it's quite puzzling. Oh man, I just can't wait. This is the Nintendo Entertainment System we're talking about. It brought us such classics like Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and among other things. Can you imagine what the Civil War is going to look like? Oh man, let's go! Okay, so my expectations may have been a little high, but I think they could have done a little better. So when you first boot up the game, you're greeted by a Union bugler, followed by the national anthem on the title screen. Funnily enough, this is one of the first games to feature it, but the very first was the basketball game Double Dribble, released in arcades. Take a listen. Alright, I think it's actually time to start playing. See, I've surrendered my keyboard, and I've opted for an original NES controller. Now this is old school. So after the title screen, the game throws you into a menu where we have a number of options. You can play as either side, with the opposing side being another player or a computer player. You're able to set the level of the computer among 3 choices, essentially changing the difficulty if you play by yourself, which is what I'll be doing today. Then you have the option of picking the year you would like to simulate. Oddly, 1865 is missing. The manual states that it's unavailable since the starting year was too unfavorable for the South. I mean, yeesh. You have the ability to toggle certain roadblocks that can pop up during the simulation, such as Native Americans, which the manual refers to as Indians who will attack armies, and Mexicans who will periodically bomb Texas for some reason. Bad weather can be toggled, as well as a ship that contains European reinforcements. That's a flat-out lie and inaccuracy that never happened. On any side, any attempts by the Confederacy to have ties with Europe failed, and while most of Europe favored the Union, none of them were ever directly involved. It states that during the war, both sides had strong diplomatic ties with Europe. What a glaring oversight! Do these people just come up with this idea all willy-nilly? Anyway, after we click on the photographer's butt for good luck, we click on Go to start the simulation. Now, depending on what year you select, the game actually gives you an explanation of what's going on. There's only one problem, though. These are pretty terrible. So let's sit back, play Professor, and let's take a look at these things. April 1861. The Southern states have opened hostilities by taking Fort Sumner. The armies are being formed. The chances of victory are the same for both sides. Everything is possible. Well, first of all, it's Fort Sumter. They couldn't even spell the name of the fort right. The chance of victory weren't even close to being the same for both sides. The Union almost always outnumbered the Confederacy in raw numbers. Plus, the everything is possible line just sounds so open to interpretation. 1862. The Battle of Bull Run does nothing to clarify the situation. But from this time forth, period, the Southern armies are led by the brilliant General Lee. Things are bound to change! Exclamation point, exclamation point. Now we don't even get a month? Just an entire year of the war summarized in Wait a sec. The second sentence isn't even a sentence. So just 3 sentences? And clarify the situation? What does that mean? The Confederacy won Bull Run. Doesn't that clear that up? 1863. The last year has seen the North gaining victory after victory. But Lee knows that in the long run, the North's industrial might will vanquish at last. He needs a decisive victory. I can't believe how pro-Southern this is. This text appears whether you're playing as either side, which honestly makes no sense to me whatsoever. I'd kinda understand if you chose the South and this popped up, but it just doesn't make any sense. 1864. The defeat at Gettysburg has seriously compromised Lee's chances of victory. The North has taken advantage as Grant advances into the Mississippi. Is a reversal of the situation still possible? You know, this is probably the best one. It's technically not wrong. I kinda like it asking you if you can change the tide of battle. It gives you incentive to win if you're playing as the South. Now, this game has a lot of elements of strategy built in, and you actually have to be pretty skilled in order to do well in this game. Here, let me explain. So we start out with a map of the US, and right off the bat, things are off. Let's pause for a second. Now look. I know this was 1990, and maybe I'm being a little too harsh, but these state borders aren't even close. Here's a real map being overlaid. Pretty bad. Come on, you're telling me that this is Pennsylvania? Also, this map shows that it's January 1861, even though the war didn't start until April. Ouch. Anyway, this is our base of operations. Depending on the year you start, certain Union and Confederate armies, represented by these little icons, are your units. When you select them, it'll tell you the breakup of your soldiers in the lower right. That'll be important for later. Each turn, you move all of them to a different area as the game permits. You can either try avoiding the other side, or you can enter a battle if you're close enough and you can fight them back. Get ready, because we're about to enter the battlefield. Battles are simple. Destroy everyone on the opposing side. You have 3 types of soldiers at your disposal. You can switch who you're playing as with the push of a button. Infantry are the simplest. You can move and shoot pretty fast. They have a short range, though, and get killed pretty easily. The cannons move slow, and they require you charge up the shots you fire, but boy are they powerful. Depending on how much charge you give them, the farther they'll reach. Cavalry are the fastest, but have horrendous range. You essentially need to get extremely close to a unit, and pray you can hit them with your dinky little sword before they shoot you dead. They also don't stop when you switch to another unit, so make sure they'll be able to loof around the screen safely before you switch. Any unit can drown if you get too close to a river. The cannons have the ability to destroy the bridge on the other side. If that happens, you can cross a smaller area, but you run the risk of having them drown in larger numbers. This is one of 2 battlefields. It may have to do with where the battle takes place, either north or south, but you can either get the river or canyon, but they're essentially the same. Instead of drowning on the canyon, you simply just fall off the canyon. When everyone on the opposing side is down, the battle's over and that army is off the map. Eliminate all the armies, and congratulations, you just won the war. Pretty simple, right? Honestly, it is. But there's just one problem. The way you fight in this game is nowhere close to how this actual Civil War went down. Sure, the 3 types of soldiers indeed existed in the actual war, but they weren't expected to take down whoever they pleased. For example, cavalry were mostly used as messengers in the beginning of the war, due to many commanders not having the training to properly use them. Plus, I don't see any black soldiers. As a matter of fact, I see absolutely no African Americans in this game at all. While the Confederacy never had any black soldiers, the Union Army used them heavily. Another thing that's off is the very nature of the combat. In the real war, they fought in straight lines, while in North and South, they're all over the place with no more than a couple in a line at once. But I understand why they went with how it is in the game. It simply makes the gameplay more interesting. Yet, it's glaringly wrong from a historical point of view, and makes the chaotic and scrambled soldiers in the game far from the truth. Now, going back to the gameplay, there's actually some ways the opposition can make a comeback and change the outcome of a seemingly easy win. From time to time, a train will pass by and award you with a certain amount of money bags. Collect 5 and you gain an extra army to place on the map. Sometimes when you're running low, this will come in a pinch. If you have the European reinforcements turned on, a boat has the possibility of giving you a new army if one of your other ones is on the coast. Sometimes the weather can screw up the computer. They are unable to travel over areas with a storm cloud above it, and they'll need to wait until it moves or disappears. Seemingly randomly, you'll get thrown into these platforming sections that have horrible controls and make no sense historically. They'll have you running across a moving train, throwing knives at the opposing side for no reason at all from what I can tell. If you're able to get to the conductor's car, you hold him at gunpoint and steal some more money? This is before the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB, was formed to rate video games. Could you imagine if you turned a corner to see your kid playing a game holding someone in gunpoint? In a Nintendo game, no less? I mean, geez, a little violent, don't you think? There's also a section where you're running across a never-ending pink building. Maybe it's a fort? You're throwing knives here too, and, whatever he's doing right there. So finally, after an outcome of the war has been decided, you're greeted with one of 4 endings, and yes, they are seemingly pro-Southern again. When you win as the North, it says, it's time to make America again the land of freedom. Again? America was never free before the war, and arguably after it too. Reconstruction had its own trials and tribulations, taking another century after the war to finally ensure civil rights for all. Winning as the South is chilling, saying long live Dixie? Even worse, when you lose as the Confederacy, the game tries to make you feel victorious, saying that the worst has been avoided and that the North had low morale, whereas the North's loss make you feel like an idiot, claiming that you have traitors in your ranks, and uses very submissive language like, well, well. So that's North and South. It was honestly a pretty big wake up call for me. I mean, it couldn't be a coincidence that this game was so pro Southern. How could this be? Well, I actually have a theory. It just might lie in the developers who made the game. With Infogrames being a French developer, I speculate that its designers were unaware of the intricacy of how Americans handle and remember this war, especially from the Southern perspective. Perhaps they wanted to make sure both sides felt equally important and equally victorious if you won, but still, to an average American player like myself, playing as the South and getting all this praise just feels wrong. Alright, so let's take a look at an actually pretty modern game based on the Civil War. This game is a first person shooter, FPS for short. Now, there's just one problem. How do you make a Civil War game that's a first person shooter that's historically accurate when FPSs require fast movement, quick reload times? Well, to tell you the truth, this game really doesn't do that all too well. For our final game, we're moving past a pretty sizable chunk of time 16 years. The amount of change from 1990 to 2006 in the world of gaming is simply staggering. We saw the advent and refinement of 3D gaming, introduced online multiplayer, and saw the birth of two juggernauts, Sony and Microsoft, cement themselves in the gaming landscape. Some popular Civil War games were released during this time, but most if not all of them were strategy games like North and South. These include Sid Meier's Antietam and Gettysburg, and the Battleground franchise of games on Windows PCs. But our game seemingly has what no other game based on the Civil War has. That's right. This game I'm holding right here is officially endorsed by the History Channel. That means it has to be true. Right? The History Channel's Civil War: A Nation Divided was released for the PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and PC by Activision, more specifically its Value Publishing division that make just cheap games. Although it's an American company, the actual game was developed by Cauldron, a little-known Slovakian developer that doesn't really exist anymore from what I can tell. The version we'll be looking at today will be the PS2 version, just because it's the most common and the cheapest. By this time, the next generation of PlayStation was right around the corner, making this game pretty obscure from the moment it was released. Fair warning, this game is pretty bloody sometimes. It's rated T for teen. You've been warned. So, without further ado, let's pop this baby in, grab ourselves a controller, and let's see what this is all about. The title screen actually uses the opening theme from the 1989 Civil War film Glory. But to be honest, it sounds a lot like another song us gamers know all too well. Take a listen. So once you press the start button, you have the option of either playing as the Union or Confederacy during certain key battles of the war. For example, the North starts out with the Battle of Fredericksburg, and the South begins with the Battle of Bull Run. Since Bull Run is first chronologically, we'll start there. You're given the option of choosing a difficulty, and trust me, you're definitely gonna want to go with easy. After selecting that, the game plays a short video explaining the build-up to the battle you're about to play, all in the style of a History Channel documentary. This is followed by a loading screen, which is actually cooler than you think. It shows a diary entry from one of the officers. Unfortunately, I was unable to find if the words were actually real, but my suspicion is that they aren't. Now, let me be frank. Nobody said the Civil War was going to be easy. But the amount of times I died on this first level of the game was just insane. I recorded over 2.5 hours of footage, And I probably saw this screen maybe like 20 times. I couldn't find a cheat code. I couldn't find anything. And this was on easy mode. Easy. So I'm afraid we'll only be able to take a look at the first level of the game. I couldn't even beat the northern level of the game. So I guess we're just going to have to sit back and take a look at the first battle of Bull Run. So right off the bat, you'll notice this game has a lot of voice acting. It's pretty bad, and some lines are hilariously funny.
Don't forget me. You can still fight. Move!
Some lines uttered by the South are kind of stereotypical, such as a yee-haw and so forth.
For the Confederacy!
Anyway, our current objective is to take out the cannons on the other side of the bridge. We have a couple methods of attacking. Of course, we can attack using our bare hands, but you'll end up getting shot sooner or later if you stick to getting up close and personal. You can also bizarrely use grenades, and you start out with 5 of them. Although early grenades made by soldiers existed during the real Civil War, their accuracy and power they have in-game are nowhere close to how they'd be in real combat. We've got a pistol and a rifle we can use to shoot. Believe it or not, the instruction manual lists out most of the weapons in the game, naming and describing them. It's pretty informational. There's just one problem, though. Now, the reloading of these guns is horribly inaccurate. Because it's a first-person shooter, they basically took inaccurate animation of them loading the rifle, but sped it up to crazy proportions. So I say, let's take a look at a video of a guy loading a real rifle and compare that to what's in-game. Roll the film! So as we take a look around, we again notice that these soldiers aren't fighting in lines. I mean, seriously, it's not that hard, game developers. One thing that's also off is the soldiers' uniforms. This is early in the war. Most wore whatever they could, and it was very possible to see a Union soldier in tan or a Confederate in blue. But here, they all look exactly the same and wear the same clothes. Once we cross the bridge, we see that ammo and med kits are everywhere for us to pick up. Now, I get why this was done from a game perspective, but I highly doubt ammo was just lying around for soldiers to pick up. The med kits are even more funny. The small boxes on the ground just magically restore your health, unlike the actual war, where you'd probably be transported to a tent to get patched up if somebody was around to care for you. Once the cannons are in sight, you can approach them and, I don't know, it looks like a comedic barrel of dynamite you set off to destroy them. After they explode, the game tells you to find your commanding officer, who just so happens to be standing in broad daylight waiting for you when in actuality, you'd probably get shot within seconds of standing there in real life. Plus, what are the odds that your officer would be a couple yards away from where you were, ready to spout orders? The whole thing is pretty inaccurate. Once you talk to the officer, you are tasked with destroying 3 barricades, and this is where I die every time. Maybe I'm missing something, but there's so many things shooting at you from nowhere, it's only a matter of time before your demise. I will give them credit where credit's due. The imagery actually makes you feel like you're a vulnerable soldier in the middle of a battlefield. The back of the game box says, experience the intensity, carnage, and chaos of the war that divided a nation. And honestly, it delivers on that pretty well. You can see a ton of smoke and dust that lingers around the battlefield. According to an actual commander at the battle, this is true as he encountered, quote-unquote, such a dust to rise from the road. The game is loud, and time after time you see cannons and other guns firing at your character, catching you by surprise. It even startled me a couple of times, to be honest. It feels like you're in a war zone, unlike the goofiness of North and South. Overall, it's frustratingly difficult, and has some pretty strange interpretations for something that prides itself on accuracy. Maybe someday I'll be able to pick up my controller again and give this game another go. So that concludes our look at games based on the Civil War. Honestly, these games were really fascinating for me to look at, but they also paint a worrying picture of how games depict wars. Now, whether you like it or not, these games are going to contain historical inaccuracies. And you know what? That can happen due for a variety of reasons. Developers, the year it came out, so many things. Civil War showed a developer who, in reality, didn't want to tell its players a ton about the war. It simply didn't take the time to explain events at all, that clearly, for a text based game, are really important if you want to be immersed. North and South shows that overseas developers have trouble making games based on the Civil War, and they may even have the potential to paint the South as the good guys without even knowing it. A Nation Divided, the closest depiction we looked at today, still has inaccuracies. You know, video games are made for a variety of reasons, and with a topic like the Civil War, it's crucial the player knows the goals of the game. They can be for entertainment, they can educate, or, they can be both. Developers have a responsibility to ensure their games, at the very least, show the war in a way that is tasteful to today's climate, no matter where in the globe you play from. Today, Civil War games are most common on these mobile phones. Seriously, just typing in Civil War on the Google Play Store or the App Store shows just a slew of different games on the topic. So I urge you to go out there, search, and maybe you'll find a game that's hilariously inaccurate, or you might even find a game that's educational and fun to play. There's even a remake of North and South on mobile devices. I urge you to go look at all these and make new discoveries. But most importantly, make sure you tell people about these and make sure that they are accurate in its depiction of a war that divided a nation.